Hashem, today's daf yomi is Horayos daf Tes, Horayos 9, and we're going to start at the Mishnah on the bottom of Ches Amabez. Actually, right after the Mishnah on the bottom of Ches Amabez 8b, 6 lines from the bottom. Today's daf is dedicated for Shemir for the Chayalim, Hatzal for the Shuyim, and Yeshua for Am Yisrael. The Mishnah said, Amar Oah, my time of the Rabbi Yossi Aglili. What's the reasoning that Rabbi Yossi Aglili states his position in the Mishnah, who says that the king never brings the carbon oil of the Yored? Remember, carbon oil of the Yored is the variable offering that if you're wealthy, you bring an animal. If you're poor, you bring birds. And if you are poor of the poor, you bring a grain offering. And it's brought for three sins. One is if you deny testimony, which is shuas ha'edus, if you deny that you know testimony and then you admit it, or if you take a false oath, and so under those circumstances where you deny testimony, you bring a false oath. We had said that you bring the carbon all of the Yored under those circumstances. And why am I drawing a blank on the other one? But it'll come back to me in a moment because the Gemara mentions it. I think it's Tumas Mikdash V'Kadasha. Anyway, so entering the temple in a state of ritual impurity. So Amar Oah, my time with Rabbi Yossi Aglili. What's the reason why Rabbi Yossi Aglili says that the king does not bring a carbon oil of the Yored? It says based upon the pasuk Amar Krava Yaki Hasham Achas Mi'ela. Somebody who will be sinning in one of these three areas. Somebody who's liable in one of these things, he's going to be liable in all of them. But somebody who's not commanded in one of them, and so therefore, somebody who's not commanded in one of them, he's not going to be obligated in all of them. Kamar, let me see the hand. Oh boy. Okay, well, if you need help turning the page, I'll be there to help you. Baruch Hashem. Maybe if he's liable in one of them, he brings it even though he's not liable in all of them, meaning maybe not like Rabbi Yossi Aglili. On the bottom of Chesam Abayz. So the Gemara is discussing, because our friend Jeff is here now, so the Gemara is discussing why Rabbi Yossi Aglili is out of the position that the king never brings a carbon oil of the Yored. So one of the Gemara is suggesting that because since the king doesn't bring the carbon on, Rabbi Yossi Aglili's reasoning is because the king doesn't bring the carbon oil of the Yored for a case of false where he denies an oath, because the king never testifies. Therefore, he never brings the carbon oil of the Yored in the other two scenarios of the carbon oil of the Yored. Versus, but maybe it's the case not like that. Maybe it's just the opposite. Maybe that's a wrong assumption. So the Gemara says, the reasoning for Rabbi Yossi Aglili is from here. The Tanya, the Rabbi Yirmi Omer, Nemar lo sagia yado, and Nemar lo tasig yado. It states with respect to the carbon oil of the Yored, it states the one, if he will not be wealthy enough, then lo tasig yado. Meaning to say that different levels of wealth, meaning to say, Rashi says on the top of 9.8, somebody who could be rich or poor. Sometimes he's poor and sometimes he's wealthy. That's where the carbon oil of the Yored applies. This excludes the Kohen HaMashiach, the anointed Kohen, and the Nasi. The Nasi here refers to a king because they're always wealthy. Are they always wealthy? That's just a given. The king and the Kohen Gadol never come to a state of poverty. The Nasi, that's the king. And it says in this context that if the Nasi will sin and he does one of the mitzvahs of Hashem, his God, means to say the one who only has above him God. And the Mashiach, Kohen HaGadol Me'achav. By the Kohen HaMashiach, it says the Kohen who is greater than his brothers. Gadol Me'achav. Wait, I just want to read about the Nasi. Rashi here tells about the king. She'ein al gabav shum adon el Hashem. He has nobody above him but God. Ta'inu melech. Melech olam asherhu. The king is always wealthy. Because if he's not wealthy, you know what he could do? He could just print new currency and then he's wealthy again. The Kohen who's greater than his brothers, he has to be greater in beauty, in koach, and wisdom, and in wealth. Reb Chaim Shulevitz says, what does it mean that Kohen God has to be the greatest in koach? Koach is typically talked about as strength. Reb Chaim Shulevitz talks about it, that he has the greatest passion to do the mitzvos. That's why the Kohen Gadol has the most koach for mitzvos. How do we know that if the Kohen Gadol doesn't have wealth, we make him wealthier? You have to make him greater than his brothers. So the Gemara says, Ravina mi Rabbi Nachum Yitzchak. Nasi shenitztara mahu. Let's say the king got tsaras, and so therefore, as a result of this tsaras, they removed him from his being king because the mitzvah is not able to be the king. What's the reason? That the Gemara is going to tell us that on Daf Yud, because it says in the Navi that once you're king, once you have tsaras, you have to step away. So then the question becomes, Mao, midcha dachi or miftar pater? Do we say it's completely pushed off and he never again brings a carbon all of the orid, even though he's no longer king? Or miftar pater, or maybe he was just exempt for that moment, but now he's liable. Amrway. So when Ravina asked Rav Nachman answered this question, he received an answer, Dilacho de Gaza, which is a cryptic answer. It means, who do you think he's paying? Is he paying from you or from the treasury? It means he still has access to the communal funds. It's like, when you're the president, even though you're no longer the president, you still have a big cushion, let's just say. Big cushion. Mona Charen once told me a story about Ronald Reagan that after he was president, Mona used to work for Ronald Reagan. So after he was president, he and Nancy said, okay, let's go out tonight. They said, yeah, let's just go out, the two of us. So they said, great. So they ran outside, they ran into the car, and then they looked at each other and said, wait, who's driving? They were in the back seat. So, okay, fine. Tanya, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Mashiach Pater Mikon. The Kohen HaMashiach is also, according to Rabbi Akiva, is exempt from all the carbon, all of the origins. Amar, my time with Rabbi Akiva. What's his reasoning? Amar Kra is that carbon Aaron Ubanav. It says about the minchas chavit, and every day the Kohen Gadol has to bring a carbon mincha, half in the morning, half at night, which is his daily sacrifice of the Kohen Gadol. But it says this is the carbon of Aaron and his children. Zuba chovolo, beina cheres b'chovolo. I mean, this is his obligatory grain offering, but he doesn't have any other grain offering, i.e., he doesn't have to bring the carbon ol v'yored of the poorest of the poor, which is the carbon mincha. So the Gemara says, ve'ema k'nimai le'rachmana. Remember the carbon ol yored as wealthy, poor, and poor of the poor. So maybe the Torah is just saying, okay, he doesn't bring the dalai dalos, the carbon mincha. My neo asiris aifa, that's the mincha. Although neos v'ashiris, but the other two levels, the bird and the animal, well, not the rachmana. The Torah is not limiting it. Whereas lo sakatay, don't say that. It says in the pasuk that the Kohen who achieve atonement with his sin offerings from one of these, and he'll be forgiven. Meaning to say, that the category only fits if you can use one of them, you can use all of them. Otherwise, if you're not qualified for one, you're not qualified for any. What about the fact that the pasuk says if you sin with one of these things and you confess it, so, but why do we say that? According to Rabbi Akiva, the king is obligated to bring the carbon all the orid, with the exception of if he denies if he denies testimony. But here we're saying the Kohen Gadol is exempt from all of them, so it doesn't stem. So Abaye v'Rava Damar Travail me'achas mashmalei la'achas. The word me'achas, that come and teach us that the king is just excluded from one. Me'achas mashmalei la'achas lo mashmalei. But when the word appears by the Kohen, it doesn't imply that. It says me'achas to mashmalei. Why? It's not the word itself, but it's the kasver rachmana besof kabe asira se'ifa. Because by the Kohen Gadol, when it says me'achas, that is written at the end of the verses. This to teach us that anyone who fits into the category of the carbon mincha of the grain offering of the Oviori fits into all of them. But by the king, it's written at the beginning. Because if he wanted to say that you're only liable in one, even though you're not liable in all of them, then it would have written it by one of the other offerings. The fact that it's written at the end by the Kohen Gadol, it implies, it says about Rava that since he's excluded from that one, he's excluded from all of them. Okay, now we're up to the next Mishnah, which is really a little bit of a summary of what we've already been discussing. Kol mitzvot shebetorah shechayavin al zadonon kares v'al shigas and chatas. All the mitzvahs of the Torah that you're liable if you do intentionally for the kares, and if you do it accidentally, you get a sin offering. Hayachan maybe kisba v'sira. Individual brings for them a female sheep or goat. Anasi, the king brings a sire. He brings a male goat. Umashiach Kohen Gadol ubezdin may be in power. They bring a bull. Bavodas kochavim. And let's say the sin would be by idolatry. Hayachad v'anasi v'Mashiach, the individual, the king, and the individual, the king, and the Kohen Gadol may be in seira. They bring a female goat. Bezdin power v'sire. Court brings a bull and a male goat. A parwa ola v'sar uchatas. A bull for the ola and a goat for the sin offering. Asham toy. What is the asham toy again? Asham toy is where you're not sure if you did the sin, but if you had done the sin, then you would bring a chatas. But now we're not sure if you did the sin. So about an asham toy, hayachet v'anasi chayavin. The laws of asham toy apply to an individual and to a king. Mashiach ubezdin peturin, but does not apply to Kohen Gadol into the court. Asham vadai, a regular asham. We know that there are 5 cases of a regular asham that are in the Torah. What are the 5 cases? We'll just mention them briefly. There's the asham gezela, where you admit you stole something. There's the asham mi'ilos, you took something from the temple. There's the asham shifcha harufa, where a man was with a woman who was half slave, half free. Who was betrothed to a Hebrew slave, an Asham Nazir, and an Asham Mitzorah. These are the 5 types of Ashamos. So Asham Vadei Ayachad Vanasi Vamashiach Hayav, an individual, the king, and the Kohen Gadol are responsible, but to Bezdin Peturin, then Bezdin is exempt. And now we have the 3 types of Korban Olah Yuri that I mentioned earlier. That they are the Tumas Mukdash Vikadashav. Hold on, did I skip? Al Shmias Sakol Bitois Vasayim Al Tumas Mukdash Vikadashav. Is the carbon of the Yored, which is Shmias Sakol, as if you deny that you know evidence. Bitois Vasayim is a false oath. And Tumas Mukdash Vikadashav, you enter into temple a state of impurity, or you ate kachim that were impure. Bezdin Peturin. The court is exempt. Vayachad Vanasi Vamashiach Hayav, and the individual, the king, and the Kohen Gadol Mashiach are obligated. Kohen Gadol Mashiach Chayav Al Tumas Mikdash V'Kadashav. Divrei Rabbi Shimon, but the Kohen Gadol is not going to bring the carbon of the Yored according to Tumas Mikdash V'Kadashav. That's position Rabbi Shimon. Ma'im Mevian carbon of the Yored. And what are these? What carbonos do you bring? And now it explains it's a carbon of the Yored. These variable offering based upon your wealth. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Hanasi Mevi Sayer. Rabbi Eliezer is of the position that in the case where the other animal or the others would be bringing carbon Yored, he brings a male goat, like he would anyways bring on his other saints. Tanya, Rabbi Shimon, you know, saying Klal, the Brisa says Rabbi Shimon was giving a general rule. Wherever the individual would be an asham talai, a doubtful asham, hanasi kayotzi. Now we say under those circumstances, hanasi kayotzi, the nasi has the same halacha as him. He also brings the asham talai, the king. Mashiach ubezim peturim, but the Kohen Gadol and the court are exempt. And anybody who brings a certain asham, nasi the Mashiach kayotzi, and the king and the Kohen Gadol have the same halacha, ubezim peturim, and the court is going to be exempt. Shmiya sakol bitois vasayim v'tumas mikdash v'kadash. Let's say you have these three cases where carbon already deny the evidence, or false oath, or tumas mikdash v'kadash, based in Peturin, and nasi Mashiach chayav, and the court is exempt, but the melech and the Kohen Gadol are obligated. Nasi chayav v'shmiyas kol, but the king doesn't have to bring a carbon already if he denies and he knows testimony, because he doesn't testify ever. Not the Kohen Gadol in the case of Tumas Mikdash B'Kadash. Kol shehu ba'ol v'yored, hanasi kiyotzi ba'ol Mashiach u'bezdin peturin. Anything that's in the law of carbon ol v'yored, the king has the same halacha, but the Mashiach or the bezdin are exempt. Well, the Gemara says we just contradicted ourselves. Agufa kasha, this price is contradictory. Amris, you said she'im Mashiach chayav b'tumas mikdash v'kadasha. You said that Kohen Gadol is now obligated to bring carbon ol v'yored if it was in the case of tumas mikdash v'kadasha, would entering the temple state of impurity. But tumas mikdash v'kadasha would depart. It implies he's exempt in that case. But in the case of the other two, he's going to be liable where it's a false oath or he denies evidence. But the next clause says, but then the next clause says, the king is liable in all the orid, but the Kohen Gadol and the court are exempt. So Katani Mashiach Bezin Peturin. And it implies that the Kohen Mashiach is exempt with the court. Ma Bezin Peturin Mikoin, Mashiach Peturin Mikoin. So too, the Kohen Gadol was exempt from all of them. But in the previous clause, we just said that the Kohen Gadol is obligated in carbon all the order with the exception of Tumas Mikdash v'Kedashav. So Kashan Adadi. So we have these two parts of the brights are contradicting each other. We're on the top of Tes on the base, or Amrav Huna, Braid Rav Yoshua, or Kasha, Kam B'Dawos, Kam B'Dali Dawos. It depends. If the Kohen Gadol is super poor, then he's going to be, then we're going to say that he's like the court, he's completely exempt. But if he's just a little bit poor, then he brings, meaning to say the birds, and so there we say he's only exempt for Tumas Mikdash Kedusha. But didn't we just say on the previous Amud that the Kohen Gadol can't be completely poor? So yeah, you have to give him wealth. But let's say he got this violation before he got the money. Let's say his stock just went down right away. He wasn't able to replace it when the level of obligation came. Okay, so now we say Rabbi Shimon several like Rabbi Akiva b'chadu, Paul and we just summarize. Rabbi Shimon holds like Rabbi Akiva in one case, and he argues with him in the other case. Several like Rabbi Akiva b'dali dalas depater. He holds like Rabbi Akiva by the poor of the poor that the Kohen Gadol is completely exempt. Paul goeh b'dalas, and but he argues with him with respect to the middle poor, that he says that the Kohen Gadol is obligated, is just exempt from Tumas Mikdash v'Kedusha, but he's obligated in the other ones. He doesn't agree with Rabbi Akiva, who completely exempts him if he's exempt from one. So now we say, Kohen Gadol chayev, according to Rabbi Shimon, he's not going to be liable on Tumas Mikdash v'Kedusha. Amar Chizkiah, my time with Rabbi Shimon, what's the reason why the Kohen HaMashiach is exempt from bringing Tarban all of the Yored in the circumstance of where he enters a temple in a state of ritual impurity, Tumas Mikdash v'Kedusha, where he eats the food impure? And he says the reason is it says with respect to Tumas Mikdash, this person will be cut off from the community. Misha Karbanos Shavel Kahal. This we learn from here. Somebody whose carbon is the same as the communities, but Yotzeh Shein Karbanos Shalakal. On Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol has a different korban than everybody else. So therefore, he's going to be exempt from this punishment. Imkei Nasinami in Karbanos Shalakal. Well, if that's the case, the king also has a different korban because than everybody else, because the community brings a bull as a sin offering, or individuals bring a female sheep or goat, whereas the Kohen Gadol brings a male goat. So Shava, no, he is the same. The king is same. Shava beKaparat Yom Kippur. He's the same when it comes to the Karban Yom Kippur, that he gets the goat just like everybody else. He's going to achieve atonement with the goat. Well, if that's the case, the Kohanim should also be exempt from the Karban Ol Yored for Tumas Mikdash V'Kadashim, because the Kohanim in general, but Kaparat Yom Kippur, they're different. They get achieved atonement with the bow of Aaron. So why do we say that they're liable? So the Gemara says Kohanim Shavokal B'Shar Mitzvot Shanakol. Yeah, the rest of the year the Kohanim are the same. It's just Yom Kippur. The Gemara says, well, Mashiach Nami Hashem B'Shar Mitzvot Shanakol. Well, the Kohen Gadol is also the same the rest of the year. So why is he exempt from Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashim? Elam Arava Ema Hachi Misha Chatatzo Shavi Yochidim. My Niu Cow. Somebody whose sin is the same as individuals, in the sense that he's liable just by the action, even without a ruling. And that is the community, meaning to say that they're liable just for actions, whereas the Kohen HaMashiach, yes, he's liable if he gives a mistaken ruling, and then he follows his mistaken ruling. That's when he brings his chata. And so therefore, Rabbi Shimon says that we are exempting the Kohen Gadol from Tumas Mikdash HaKadosh. Rabbi Eliezer says, Hanasi may be sire. Rabbi Eliezer says that the Nasi brings a male goat. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, El B'Tumas Mikdash V'Kadashav, Ho'ol V'Nemar Karetz Bo Kibet Kavua. So Rabbi Eliezer is on the position that the king brings a carbon ol v'yored, unlike the other three possibilities, that wealthy brings an animal, poor brings two birds, the poor brings the grain offering, and then we saw the position that he's exempt from everything, but Rabbi Eliezer says no, he brings a male goat. So the Rabbi Yossi says the king is exempt from everything because he's never poor, but Rabbi Eliezer says no, he brings the male goat. And what's the reasoning? Well, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, when does he say he brings this male goat? Ella v'tumas mikdash v'kedashav. Only in one of the cases, the case of tumas mikdash v'kedashav, hol v'nemar kares bo kibekavua, because there it says explicitly the sin of kares like a regular chatas, and so therefore he brings a male goat because it's similar to a regular chatas. So Amar Papa, it's logical to say that this position of Rabbi Yochanan, the Rabbi Eliezer admits that when something that the punishment is not kares, that the king does bring a carbon all of the ari. He said that the Rabbi Eliezer al kulin kamar. If you're saying Rabbi Eliezer says by all of them he brings the male goat, Michti Sayer Nasi Upar Mashiach Bimkom Yached Chatas Kai. Since the sire of the king and the bow of the Kohen Gadol, they come in place of the carbon chatas, meaning in a case where an individual brings a sin offering. If that's the case, Nisni Nami Mashiach may be par b'shmias kol b'tusis v'tayim. Well, if that's the case, we should say, just like Rabbi Eliezer is of the position that the Nasi brings, that the king brings a goat in these cases, I should have also mentioned the Kohen Mashiach. Almidolo Kotani Mashiach, Shmamina Tumas Mikdash Avkai. And the Mashiach Pater. We see that he's only referring to the case of Tumas Mikdash, the Kedoshim, where we just established a minute ago that the Kohen Gadol is exempt from that. We said that he's exempt from the Tumas Mikdash Kedoshim. Remember that because of the fact that it doesn't say Kahal, it says Kahal. Amar Rav Huna B'rei Rav Nathan or Papa Mimaya. What kind of proof is that? Dilma Rabbi Eliezer Rav Kulkai. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer is referring to all of them. Mashiach Savu like Rabbi Akiva. By the code of Mashiach, he holds like Rabbi Akiva. The Amar Mashiach Pater B'Korn says he's totally exempt. Amalei Rabbi Akiva Mipater Mipar. Okay, Rabbi Akiva says the code of Mashiach doesn't bring the carbon all the yard, but maybe he would require him to bring a bull. The Suol Median. That's a strong proof. The Rabbi Eliezer admits that the king never brings a carbon asham. Tani Tana Kamed Rav Sheshes Asham Toy Baal Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashim. So he said he taught Tana taught in front of Rav Sheshes. He was studying this. Somebody was studying this. Tana means to repeat over. So Rav Sheshes was not a Tana. Obviously, he was later on, but it means somebody was repeating a Tanaitic statement in front of Rav Sheshes. And he says the Asham Toy is brought in the case of Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashim. You're not sure if you entered in or not. If you had entered in, you would bring carbonol of the urid. Typically, Asham Toa is only something that's brought on a chatas. But here, he says, you also bring an Asham Toa. So Amar Way, the Amar Chamani, who told you this idea? It's a radical position. He says, Rebbe Eliezer, this is like Rebbe Eliezer. Amar Hov and Amar Bo Karis could become Fawah. Maisi Nasi Sayarwell. Since it says Karis by it, so therefore the king brings a goat. And so too, we bring an Asham Toy. But he says, but we have a statement that Rabbi Yochanan says, no, he doesn't say you bring an Asham Toy. So Kasha, that's a difficulty. Basically, it's a challenge to Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, so Hajnalach, Hora Kohen Mashiach. And now we're going to start, God willing, we're up to the third chapter. Third chapter, you see, is a lot of words. And there's also a lot of very deep ideas in this third chapter, very, very deep ideas, which God willing we'll get to in the coming day. Yes, Shekoach.
Thank you.
This is the last chapter of of the Talmud Nezikin. Yes, Shkoyach.